this is Jackie here with the Sexy Politico once again, and I'm here interviewing Tamara Young. Now, Tamara, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. I am in my mid 30s. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. You can hear my kids screaming in the background, most likely. I am a stay-at-home mom. I just kind of left the corporate world a little over a year ago. And so I just run a business at home and do some podcasting and run around with two toddler girls. And that's pretty much my life. I'm
I
also in recovery from alcohol addiction. So I do a lot of work in that community with women who are also in recovery.
I feel like the two of us are basically the same with opposites. Where
Probably.
it's like I'm a stay-at-home mom. I have two boys. I and you run a political podcast where you run more conservative than I do. So it's sort of like we're like the same, but opposites in a lot of ways. But
Yeah,
I'm sure that we have a lot of things that are very much in common.
I'm sure. And that was the whole point of starting my podcast originally, is I was like, I bet there are more people who really actually ultimately share the same values, just come at it with different opinions as far as the how, like how do we get
Oh
where we
yeah.
want to be?
I
It's
wish that
interesting to use
people
the
were
word
willing to
conservative.
talk. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
People
And so
need
I
to talk to
appreciate
each
you.
other.
Yeah, that's why I was especially interested to talk to you because I was like, yes, this is what I want more of. I don't want, just to be in a microcosm of people who just coming my own biases, because that's what I've really worked hard to do the last couple of years is shed my bias. And it's interesting to use the word conservative, like more conservative to describe me, because I can see that on some of the issues individually that I've shifted perspectives on. But I actually come from an entire adulthood of really staunch liberal ideology. And so I've really lived in communities and kind of stayed in those echo chambers of really liberal left wing progressivism, really my whole adult life. And so my perspective started to shift, like really entirely because I got really curious about, okay, I actually know some really good people who believe the polar opposite of what I believe. And instead of staying in these echo chambers that are confirming my ideology, I'm going to really explore what it is they're hearing. I watched the documentary, like a lot of us did, the social dilemma,
Yeah. Yeah.
where,
I
my
think
takeaway
everybody
was
watched that during that came out during the pandemic, right?
it
Am I
either during the
remembering right?
pandemic or right before, but I remember
Yeah.
just thinking, oh, we're literally all hearing different things, different sets of facts, different ideologies claiming to be, the only right way. And so I really wanted, at first I took a full on media break.
Yeah.
So I had gotten married. I was having my first baby.
I had to do that during COVID. Like the beginning of
Yeah.
COVID is like I had one baby at the time and I couldn't handle all the noise
Yeah.
from everywhere. But let's just move on just really quickly. So I've been on the internet for over 10 years and I haven't personally discussed my own issues with alcohol in my 20s and early
Mhm.
30s. I personally used to use alcohol and sex as ways to cope with my feelings and emotions.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to deal with. But I was told by society that was empowerment. And do you think that my perspective, what do you think of that perspective that it just seems as though that alcohol is being used towards women, especially as like a sign of empowerment and liberation?
I think you're dead on. I just had this conversation with another friend because the irony of shedding kind of some of the more, I was a staunch feminist, or so I thought. So, where it's like you don't need a man. In fact, men are, pretty historically and just inherently oppressive. And I focused on my career, and looking back really to my own detriment. And so, and I just mentioned that because I think it's a little bit intertwined with my own relationship with alcohol and my own impressions. And I should caveat all of this by saying it's ultimately, I believe, personal responsibility. I take responsibility for
Absolutely, absolutely.
how just heavily, and I mean, I was knocking on death's door. I tried to take my life. I was in 5 different treatment centers. I had a really, really, I was drinking a handle of vodka a day. I had a really, really heavy, really fraught battle with alcohol. It just had a really strong hold on me. So did depression, so did anxiety, so did self-harm. And Looking back though, I can observe somewhat objectively at least, that the culture that I was in and the ideology I was buying into did make me think that it at least masked a lot of the issues I had because I'm
Mhm.
like, no, it's powerful. My friends and I, we would joke, we were all women who were single, and we would joke about, how we're sitting in our fur coats and we're all bougie and fancy, and we're, drinking alcohol and taking pills, and we're joking about how we're alcoholics. Meanwhile, one of our friends, we lost to liver failure.
Yeah.
She just dropped dead on the floor. And since I've been a little girl, I remember just knowing I wanted to be a mom, and knowing that in a healthy relationship, the best parts of myself come out. Yet I put that all on the back burner, thinking that's not the right way to do things. I have to get the career. I have to be a strong, powerful, independent woman. And then I can have those things. And so I think what it really did was it hit the pause button for me on getting my life started and the way I wanted my life to look. I had a great career and things looked really great on the outside, but I was going home every day so I could drink the way I wanted to, and just spiraling myself into the worst possible mental state. And so that's something I really do pick up on now. Is I think I respect that people can have a healthy relationship with alcohol, right? Some people can.
Yeah.
And they can leave a little bit of wine in their wine glass, and it blows my mind because I'm like, how do you not drink the whole thing? So I recognize that you can have a healthy relationship, but you do pick up on the kind of mommy wine culture and just,
That was my
yeah,
next question. It was especially after becoming a mom. If it feels as though society has picked up on the increased deaths to liver failure that
yeah,
women are having, and that this is harmful, but like this wine mom culture with and bad mom culture where it's like you can drink wine and not be a perfect mom and not look like June Cleaver, but but wine mom can be really unhealthy for some women especially. And my husband sometimes he'll be like, don't drink that. No, 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 no. I
yeah.
have my husband's there because he knows my relationship with alcohol, and he's like, yeah, remember you can have the club soda.
Yeah. Yeah. I have my mocktails, or which are really just fancy juices. It's empowering to leave it behind, but this might sound a bit conspiratorial for me to say, but when in doubt, I just kind of follow the money. And
Mhm.
the alcohol industry is such a profitable industry. It's not going to go away.
And I think that's where Wine Mom came from, though. I think that they're like, oh, look at this big group of people that probably aren't drinking as much. Let's make cocktails look cool. Let's make sure Sex in the City is showing off the cosmos. And then, oh, look, alcohol's more
Yeah.
expensive. Let's go for the wines now.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If we can embed something into the cultural conversation and the cultural psyche
And
in a
like
way that makes it
shirts,
not
Wine
only,
Mom. It's like
yeah, that
I
not only
don't
makes
I
it normal, but in fact glorified, that this is totally okay, then you create a whole new market of
yeah,
consumers, because nobody, if they do want to drink, they don't have to hide it. They don't have to be ashamed of it. And I'm not a fan of shame for anybody, but I do think that it ultimately does harm, because we have to remember that alcohol is a drug. It's a legal drug, but it is a drug. It is one of
yeah,
the most deadly drugs. It's very difficult to detox from alcohol and dangerous to detox from alcohol. But it's one of the drugs that we've decided in the United States of America is legal. And I think adults should, have the right to put whatever they want into their bodies. But I think that, yeah, those
we need more
perceptions that somehow,
education. We
yeah, that
need
somehow it's
education.
a
It's
harmless
completely
drug.
miss it. Yeah, that that educational part is missing. I mean, consider if you take Europe, for example. I mean, you're in Europe, it's like, oh yeah, it's no big deal. Give your kid a little bit of wine at dinner, but they're taught from a young age that wine is no big deal,
Mhm.
that it's just no big deal. And most people, of course, there are people no matter in the world that binge, but most people overseas are like, Why should we drink to excess? Why should we get drunk? There's no purpose to it. There is
Yeah.
no purpose to getting sick and vomiting.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of symptoms of a problem I can't quite articulate in the United States that make us distinctly disturbed. Um, and
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're nailing one of the symptoms of, that so many Americans struggle with having the same kind of relationship with alcohol that other countries seem to have. And I don't know what the answer is, but I suspect it's related to some of the same issues that make us so violent, increasingly violent over the last couple of decades in particular.
Yeah. Yeah. So I so let's so I I think I've mentioned this to you before, but I lived through a school shooting in 2008. I went to Northern Illinois University. I still have terrible nightmares of what happened that day. It's something that still almost 15 years on, it still haunts my dreams.
Mhm.
And my oldest will be starting kindergarten very soon, and I'm sitting here as a mom going, this scares the four-letter word out of me sending him to school.
Yeah.
This really does. Have substitute taught at times. I've had to do lockdown drills with 4 and 5-year-olds, and no, 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 no. And
Mhm.
I feel like saying taking all the guns away, that's never gonna happen. Most people who I know who own weapons are fine with background checks, most people. But I mean,
Sure.
what's it gonna do though? Most of these guns are purchased legally or purchased by somebody in the family of the shooter completely legally. How
Mhm.
are we what are we gonna do? That's just I feel like short of taking all the guns away, there really isn't much that our lawmakers are really willing to do to help this situation. And nobody's gonna take all the guns away.
Yeah, the government certainly isn't gonna give up their guns, that's for sure. The military industrial
Oh, yeah,
complex
yeah,
and the
no.
police will always continue to have guns at the very least, and yeah, I think, so I'm obviously here in Nashville, and we're on the heels
Yeah,
of the Covenant shooting, at which, some of my friends' kids go to school there,
yeah.
and so it's been an especially just emotional and tenuous time, here. But I feel I've never lived through a school shooting, and I'm so sorry that you had that traumatic, unspeakable experience. That again it's such a uniquely American problem, and I think again you nailed it when you said that you can't imagine how legislators are gonna solve it. I think where I where I really empathize with people on all sides of the gun control conversation in particular is we all want the same thing. I think it's pretty dangerous to position one side as caring about guns and the other side as caring about children because it couldn't be further from the truth. We all want our kids to be safer. Again, people have very different ideas about the extent to which gun control measures might help us get there. But I think where I get frustrated is with expecting governments to solve problems that historically governments make worse. And so I think that there's something about this problem in our country that I don't believe we can legislate our way out of. I don't think
I
that
th
we can regulate our way out of.
I do think that there is one thing that we do in this country that I feel like we glorify weapons in our media
Mm,
with all of the police shows and all of the weapons in TVs and movies and things of that nature. And while I don't want to turn into one of those people who are like, let's get rid of all the violent video games and all of the violent shows,
yeah,
I think that the fact is in the 50s and 60s, the closest thing you were allowed to have as a gun is Lone Ranger's weapon and space lasers. They didn't have guns on TV until the 80s and 90s.
yeah.
And I think that it says something there.
It does. Well, it's really this post Columbine era. It's like Columbine is like it's representative of this impetus in our culture. I've gone down every single rabbit hole of every individual gun control idea or non-gun control related idea. And I will tell you, without going down the kind of gun control rabbit holes, unless you want to, I'm always happy to. Thinking about where this problem stems from, I don't have a clear answer or solution. I think I'm struck by a few people who have done that kind of work to explore that around the world. Michael Moore's documentary, Bowling for Columbine, is a great example of, there are examples of other countries that glorify violence and don't have this problem, or that watch the same kinds of TV and video games and don't have this problem, that have the same access to guns and don't have this problem. And I do think that where we are distinct, and I think he hit on, like, just glazed on something for a brief second that I was like, ooh, I think there's something there. But I think in America, we are put, especially by media, I'm going to make them the primary culprits or scapegoats, but we are put in such a constant state of fear. The news cycle is terrifying. And I think there might be something to this underlying fear that we have, not of necessarily the government or of some big scare. I mean, we're told which country to be afraid of. We're told which political party to be afraid of. But most importantly and most shockingly, we're told which neighbor to be afraid of.
Yeah.
We're told which race to be afraid of, which ideological group to be afraid of, which ethnicity, which religion. We are told to fear. We're constantly being fed content that makes us fear the other right next door. And that's the most, I think, just saddening thing to me about our culture. And I love our country and I love my life. And so I don't want to be all doom and gloom, but it does make me so sad to think, I'm raising my little tiny, precious, innocent girls in a world where I'm going to have to, like, you and I, sister, are going to have to try really hard to instill values in them of loving their neighbor, helping their neighbor, not being so automatically afraid of somebody that they miss opportunities to connect with other people and really hear and listen to other people and learn from other people.
No, I've got the additional problem of my kids are biracial, so there's probably going to be some having to teach them how to deal with racism.
Mm. Yeah. I'm sure you have I'm sure as a white woman marrying someone of a different race has exposed you to a lot that you were never exposed to before.
I was 7 months pregnant with my eldest, and my husband went to go get the car, as you do as a good husband. And this woman comes up to me. I'm standing next to a statue of the Virgin Mary, by the way. And she looks at me and she's like, "Oh, why are you having a baby with one of them?" And I
Mm.
looked over to the other side and saw this statue of the Virgin Mary, and I'm like, "Because you out in front of Mary." And then the car
Yeah.
comes up. Then the car comes up, and I'm like, "God bless you."
Yeah. Well, that's a great, I applaud your response because I mean, grace and compassion and love. I mean, in the South, we say bless their heart. But when it's your people, when it's your family, um, those claws can
I
easily come out and you really want to
oh
teach somebody a little bit of a lesson. So
yeah.
I applaud you for
I
not going there, but
I
it's
was also 7 months pregnant. I mean, how much could I have really done? I was
I don't know. You never know with all this hormone surging through
so
your
true.
body.
That's so true. So, do you think that there are certain issues that people on all political spectrums can agree on that I feel like let me rephrase that. I feel like there are certain issues on that people on all political spectrums can agree on in one way or another. May not agree how to get there, but can
Mm.
agree on that are just never going to get voted on and never dealt with in DC because it won't get the money from all of the lobbyists and special interest groups and things of that nature.
Yes. Well, not to open up too big a can of worms, but healthcare would be
Yeah,
one. We have a
maternity
healthcare
leave.
crisis in this country.
Oh,
It is,
we do. We
we
do.
have the worst outcomes in any developed country to show for it in many, by many measures of health, highest, maternal and infant mortality rates, highest obesity,
Yep.
addiction, depression. 70 something percent of Americans are on at least one prescription drug. I came off of 8 last year, came gradually off of 8 prescription medications. And we're taught that there's this world of alternative medicine, that's all voodoo. But the primary, more kind of medical establishment driven medicine in the US is not working. It's not working. It is so expensive. Every time our politicians touch it, it gets more expensive.
Yep.
Even when they claim their goal is to make it affordable care. Big insurance gets subsidized again and makes bank while millions of people are denied care. It's a crisis. I believe that
Our
that's a basic
taxes
human right.
our taxes go up,
Mhm.
but our politicians won't say, "Let's take this tax money and just give healthcare
No, they're great at reallocating our tax money to big
to."
industries,
Yeah,
to their constituents who have given them lobbying money and finance their campaigns. They're really good at that.
you
Um,
I
but
think the first thing that needs to be done is that if you are elected to Congress, that you cannot hold
trade,
stocks.
yeah,
You can't hold stocks, you can't hold bonds. You put your money in a freezer and just you can't touch it for as long as you're in Congress, you and your spouse.
right. Well, you'll get a kick out of this because this will really shed light on my political history. But when you used to ask me who my all-time favorite president is, people ask that cliche, cheesy people on President's Day, especially.
Yeah.
Um, I used to say, well, because it was one of the first elections I voted in, I said Obama. During a time I said George W. Bush because I wanted to prove like I wasn't so liberal that I couldn't appreciate like how funny he was. This is how just politically just uninformed I was. I think
Yeah.
George W. Bush is one of the most insidious war criminals in our nation's history. But my favorite president today would be the totally cliche answer of George Washington, because the man didn't even want the job. Like
Exactly.
he had plenty of pitfalls and plenty of defects, but he didn't want the, can I curse on this podcast? He
You
didn't
can
want the
curse on
fucking
my
job.
podcast. Yeah.
He wanted term limits. He did not want to be in that position a second longer than than the need for his public service called of him. And that's what we need. We need George
Term limits.
Washingtons,
Yeah.
and we
We
need
need
term
full term
limits.
limits on
Yes.
every we need term limits on Congress persons. We need term limits in the judiciary. We don't need people who are about to die in positions of power.
Yes. Agreed. See, these are issues we can all agree on. Is I think that that's one of the first things that we can tackle. Unfortunately, it becomes highly politicized, and somebody, when they talk about weeding out corruption, it's only the kind of corruption that they have a problem with that benefits their side, and so it gets labeled, drain the swamp, and then that becomes a conservative issue when it's like, stop it. Like corruption is actually an issue that all Americans can really agree. We would prefer to have a bit less corrupt politicians running our
Yeah.
country.
I mean, come on. You look at the way that the congressional lines are drawn in different states. I lived in Maryland before I recently moved, and
Hmm.
those were some crazily drawn congressional districts. These we need politicians who are in power for, I feel like, less than 15 years.
Yeah,
We
15 years.
less
That's very generous.
16
And
years if you want to make it an even number, fine, because
yes,
all of
and then
our
that
elections are even numbers.
if somebody wants to stay in a job that long that's paying a public service salary, I mean, I don't think that you should be able to make $20 million on an $85,000 a year salary. I
They're
don't think it should be
making
allowed.
and they're making you get a full pension after 4 years.
Yeah, and it's telling. I don't know that there's a way to rule book your way out of this one, but I do think it's a problem that Dick Cheney, for example, he comes over from Halliburton to be vice president, goes back to the weapons industry. You see it a lot in healthcare with whether it's an insurance company, they'll spearhead legislation that happens to benefit big insurance and then go work for Humana or whoever in a $2 million a year gig after their congressional term is over. It's this incestuous
Yep.
industry government relationship is it's hiding in plain sight. I don't know why I think that these issues are just kind of strategically hammered into our heads in the media to distract us from it because this obvious corruption is hiding in plain sight. It's just like nobody has a chance to catch their breath from the latest crisis or tragedy or news cycle, whatever's in the news cycle, war, whatever, to long enough. We can't catch our breaths long enough to really come together and cry out as a people for these issues to be addressed.
There's a great website, which I'm sure you know about, called opensecret.org.
Hmm.
Anybody who's listening, if you want to know where the money comes from in federal elections, go to opensecret.org. They update it. They update quarterly, and it will tell you who has given money to each political candidate on the
Hmm.
federal level. They're not as good with the state stuff, but
Yeah.
federally, they are
And it's
chef's
telling
kiss on that.
it's a you'll see it's a bipartisan issue.
Completely bipartisan. No, and you're sitting there and you're like, they're giving money to that person, they're giving money to that person, and it is very telling to what is the issues that are being raised and what's being done and where the money's coming from.
Yeah. And the other side of that, the pushback you get is, well, you cannot win without the money. And unfortunately, I believe that that is true. I think that that's the way the system has been designed for the past several decades. I think you cannot win without the backing of major industry billionaires and
Yeah, but if billionaires are if all the if all of the businesses at least are not allowed to give, that's a whole lot less money. And if all the money has to be open, you can't have dark money, you can't have the super PACs and the PACs and all that crap like that.
Mhm.
We have completely open money. I think there'll be a lot less money in politics, which could help
Yeah.
some people get in. I mean,
I
it's
I
still
love the idea.
upper middle class, but still, it's not going to be, Joe Schmo down the street. Although, I mean, to be fair, AOC, she was able to get into Congress without all of the money right away.
Yeah, she was plucked out by the DNC as
She was
time for
plucked
that.
out, but at the beginning of her campaign, she wasn't.
Yeah,
Someone you gotta, I mean, you start somewhere. I mean, Emily's List though is just a website that if you're a woman and you're pro-choice, they're gonna pluck you onto that website no matter what.
sure.
And it's good, but I mean, there's also the same sorts of lists on the conservative side as well. So I think at this point right now, politics are really pushing women and people of color to enter the race because they've just realized that we've got a bunch of aging politicians that need to get out and we need to elect younger people that look like the people of this country.
Yes, when you can no longer drive safely or form a coherent sentence, it's time,
Yeah,
perhaps, for you to step down.
I am so glad to have had this conversation with you. And I think that I think people on both sides of the aisle need to have more conversations like this because at the end of the day, I think everybody wants a safe place for their children or grandchildren or people that they love to be able to grow up, feel safe, and become whatever they want to be.
Yeah, people wanna build the kind of life that they envision for themselves, and they just wanna be free to do that. And that's something that I fight for and that I think we can all fight for. And look at us just having this conversation being, politically, a little bit different inclined on a lot of things. We already came to something we both like are super passionate about and can
Oh,
agree on.
I
Imagine if
it's like, yeah.
we all
I
did
mean,
that.
let's sit here and solve maternity leave. Let's solve the healthcare crisis, and then and then after that we'll fight over we'll fight over something stupid.
Okay, perfect. Yes. And then
Uh,
we'll pull out our fact sheets and like the internet research we've done and compare notes and quip with
Oh,
each
the
other.
guns should be gone because guns are bad. No.
The government's never taking my guns. Yes, yeah, we
Yeah,
can.
because
We
you're
can like
conservative. You
we
think the
can fulfill all
government's
of the cliches for people too.
oh
We can go
oh
there
yeah,
next
live
time. We can do a total satire episode where we just try to be the worst versions of our
oh god.
political ideologies.
Yes, yes, yes. I need my Bernie Sanders mittens and a and oh and the cat ear hat that I got for when marched in the women's march. I have to wear,
I
you know,
Oh, nice.
if I'm gonna my sister-in-law made it for me. I'm not gonna ever get rid of it. She made it for me.
You know, Bernie Sanders actually has a little special place in my heart because even though I vehemently disagree with many of his ideas around policy, like the man got done dirty by the DNC.
Oh,
And
yes,
I
he
loved
sure
that
as hell
the
did.
man was an outsider who almost got in
I
and
wish
was
he
just totally
had.
robbed.
I wish he had. I mean, I I still think that President Trump would have won, but he was done dirty.
For sure. For
He
sure. And
was
we'll never know.
no, we won't know because I don't remember what her name was with the super curly hair, and Hillary Clinton got worked together to prevent it.
Yes. Yeah. Well, this has been fun.
This has been a
I hope we
lot of
can do it
fun.
again.
Oh, absolutely. We'll schedule something sometime in the future, especially after I have some stuff with my family, and so we're going to be out of the country pretty soon. So after we get back,
Okay.
I'll send you an email.
Yeah. Drop me a note and I hope you're feeling better.
Oh, God. My kids, a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old with strep throat is evil.
Oh, both were sick.
Both were sick.
Oh, that's the way it goes. You know, I say that last time. So they either all get sick at once and then I'll complain about that, or we'll get sick just as somebody's getting better, the next person gets
Mm,
sick. And so it's this long drawn out thing. And I will also complain about that. So
my mom's like,
I'm
but
glad y'all are
anyway,
feeling better.
thanks. And I'll speak with you soon. Thank you for being on the Sexy Politico podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jackie.
Thank you. Bye.